There were 3 of them. They walked into the orchard behind the house, and they never came back. In 1932, 3 cousins vanished during a family birthday party in rural Kentucky. By sunset, the cake had gone cold. By midnight, their parents were in handcuffs. No bodies, no witnesses, no answers. 93 years later, the farmhouse is scheduled for demolition until a construction crew finds something buried beneath the roots of the apple orchard. Something wrapped in oilcloth, with a locket inside. What it contains rewrites everything they thought they knew. Subscribe for more cinematic true crime mysteries. August 7th, 1932. The summer light had a thickness to it that day, as if the air itself were sweating through the sky. Flies circled the cake table while the adults fanned themselves with folded newspapers. Somewhere near the orchard fence, the gramophone crackled out. Happy days are here again. An optimism that felt brittle even then, before the screaming started. The McCreary farm sat on the edge of Mill Creek, a town so small it was a rumor more than a place. The Depression had flattened everyone. Families shared bread, gossip, and sorrow in equal measure. But the McCrearys still had the orchard, 20 acres of apple trees, planted back when times were good. That orchard fed 3 families. It was where the cousins played, and where the whispers would begin. That Sunday was meant to celebrate 12-year-old Ada's birthday. She wore a sky blue dress, hemmed short because the fabric was rationed, and her mother tied her hair with matching ribbons. Her cousins, the twins, June and Ellis, arrived from the neighboring farm just after noon. They carried a wooden box wrapped in a red bandana. No one remembers what was inside. Photographs taken that morning show laughter, lemonade, a family trying to smile through hunger. Then, as the sun hit its highest point, the children were gone. One moment they were running toward the orchard, chasing a stray balloon. The next, nothing. At first, no one panicked. They'd hide among the trees, someone said. They were playing their usual games. By dusk, the joke stopped. By midnight, the sheriff was there, and by dawn, search parties combed the woods. No footprints, no torn fabric, no sound. 3 children had vanished from the same property in daylight, surrounded by family. And when the sheriff's report was filed, it ended with 5 words scrawled in pencil. No rational explanation discovered yet. The McCreary parents were questioned, then separated, then arrested. Rumors spread faster than facts. The orchard was fenced off for evidence. Newspapers called it the vanishing of Mill Creek. People came to stare at the trees, as if the branches might whisper what they'd seen. But the truth never surfaced. Not in 1932. Not in the decades that followed until now. May 12th, 2025. Mill Creek, Kentucky. The first shovel bit into the orchard at 9:04 a.m. By 9:07, the air smelled of rot and iron. Caroline Vance stood by the fence line, arms folded, notebook pressed against her chest. The demolition crew had paused when the backhoe teeth struck something that didn't sound like stone. Hollow, fragile. One of the men, Toby, his name tag said, kneeled and brushed aside the soil. What he uncovered made him swear under his breath. It wasn't a coffin. It wasn't even a full box, just a weathered plank, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with wire, and beneath it, something white. Not bone white, more like paper. Caroline stepped closer. "Don't touch it," she said. Her voice had the sharpness of habit as she'd been a journalist for 20 years, 15 of those spent walking through other people's unfinished stories. The McCreary disappearance was supposed to be a side piece for a historical feature. Until this, Toby backed off. The crew gathered in a semicircle, their shadows stretching long under the morning sun. The county sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, Sheriff Irene Polk, gray hair pulled tight, mirrored sunglasses hiding her eyes, ducked under the tape and crouched beside the find. "Get forensics," she said, voice low, and someone call the coroner. Caroline took out her camera. Mind if I... Miss Vance, Polk cut her off. This isn't a photo op. I know, Caroline said, already clicking the shutter. It's history. When the oilcloth was peeled back, the smell deepened. A sour mix of damp wood and something older. Inside was a small metal locket, tarnished but intact. The initials engraved on the back, A.M. Ada McCreary. Caroline's breath caught. It's her, she whispered. Sheriff Polk looked at her. You're certain? I've seen the photo. Ada wore a locket like that. Her father ordered it from the Sears catalog in 1931. Polk didn't answer right away. She straightened, scanning the orchard. The same trees, now gnarled and hollow, that had watched 3 children disappear. We'll need to halt the demolition, she said. This whole area's a crime scene now. Caroline nodded. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt the slow curl of dread. Because she knew what came next. The excavation, the headlines, the old ghosts clawing their way out of the ground. By noon, the news vans had arrived. Someone leaked the coordinates. Reporters clustered by the fence, microphones pointed like bayonets. 93 years later, the orchard gives up its first secret. Caroline slipped her notebook into her bag and walked toward the old house. It had been boarded up since the 60s, the windows painted over with black tar, but she could still make out the faint outline of a child's handprint near the porch rail. The paint around it had cracked, as if the house itself was shedding its skin. Inside, dust floated like ash. A single chair remained in the kitchen. On the table, someone had carved words into the wood long ago. We didn't mean to. Caroline traced the letters, feeling the grooves with her fingertips. The marks were uneven, desperate. She pulled out her recorder and spoke softly. Found initial carving inside McCreary farmhouse kitchen. Phrase reads, we didn't mean to. Could be pre-war etching or later vandalism. Tone suggests confession. Outside, the sheriff called her name. Caroline stepped back into the sunlight. The coroner was lowering a small evidence bag into a cooler. Inside, the locket glinted faintly. Caroline thought of the old newspaper photograph she'd studied the night before. Ada, June, and Ellis, standing beneath the apple blossoms, smiling, unaware that history would soon erase them. Now, for the first time in nearly a century, one of them had spoken again, through a relic pulled from the dirt. She knew she'd be staying in Mill Creek longer than she'd planned, and she knew the orchard wasn't done talking. May 13th, 2025. Mill Creek, Kentucky. The rain came overnight, soft and steady, turning the orchard into a slick of exposed roots and rain-filled scars. When Caroline arrived the next morning, the demolition site looked like a battlefield. Yellow tape fluttered against the mist. The men had packed up their machines. Nothing moved except the plastic tarps covering the exposed trench. Sheriff Polk stood under a wide black umbrella. Her boots were coated in mud. They worked till midnight, she said when Caroline approached. Stopped when the water filled the hole. We'll pump it out and start again. Did they find anything else? Caroline asked. Polk shook her head. Not yet, but we're only 2 feet down. The county archivist dropped off some old maps. Turns out the McCreary farm sat on top of a decommissioned mine shaft. Could explain a lot of missing ground. Caroline scribbled that down. The mine shaft wasn't new information, not entirely. One of the original 1932 reports mentioned subterranean access, but no one had ever proved the shaft existed. The depression swallowed records as easily as people. Inside the old farmhouse, the air was colder than outside. Rain tapped the roof in irregular rhythms. Caroline set up her recorder on the kitchen counter and began a slow walk through, describing every detail. Interior consistent with early 1930s construction, hand-planed molding, square nail floors, evidence of smoke damage near fireplace. She paused by the hallway door. The smell of damp plaster mixed with something else. Old iron, maybe blood rust baked into the walls. When she lifted her flashlight, she noticed faint streaks running vertically down the wallpaper as if something had once seeped from above. At the end of the hall, the narrow staircase curved upward into shadow. She hesitated. The floorboards groaned under her weight. Dust cascaded like powder from the ceiling. On the landing, a window looked out toward the orchard. Through the warped glass, she could see the trench, the tarp, the workers' coffee thermoses lined along the fence. For a moment, she imagined the scene in reverse. Children running through the grass, the flash of a blue dress, a balloon tangled in branches. The same air, the same earth. Only time had shifted. She opened the door to the first bedroom. The wallpaper had peeled in strips, exposing wooden slats beneath. She aimed the flashlight and froze. Words again. Carved deep this time, crossing over each other like tally marks. We heard her in the dark. Her throat tightened. Her. Singular. Not them. Ada, June, or someone else. She took a photo, steadying her hands. The grooves were old, decades at least, but they hadn't been made with a child's hand. The angles were deliberate, carved by someone with strength, with purpose. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. Miss Vance. Sheriff Polk's voice echoed up the stairwell. Caroline exhaled and turned back. Up here. Polk's footsteps climbed slowly. You shouldn't be inside without clearance. I was documenting surface evidence, Caroline said, lowering the camera. Found something on the wall. Polk leaned in, reading the carving. Her expression didn't change. Get your pictures, then let's go. The soil samples came back. There's calcium consistent with animal bone, but not human yet. Yet, Caroline repeated. Optimistic. Polk gave a dry half-smile. You write for the Courier, right? You'll get your story. Just don't get in my way. When they stepped back outside, the clouds had begun to break. Shafts of light pierced through the orchard, landing on the wet leaves like silver coins. Caroline's recorder was still running in her coat pocket, capturing the ambient hum of the world returning to motion. A pickup pulled into the lane, tires crunching gravel. An older man climbed out, thin, stooped, wearing a wool coat despite the heat. That's Raymond Ellis, Polk murmured. Last surviving relative. He was 9 when they disappeared. Caroline approached him carefully. Mr. Ellis? I'm with the Courier. We're documenting the recovery. His eyes were pale, almost translucent. They said you found Ada. We found her locket, she said. We don't know more yet. He nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. That locket, he whispered, wasn't hers when she died. Caroline blinked. You mean when she disappeared? He looked past her toward the trees. You think they disappeared, but I heard them. All night, under the orchard knocking. Polk stepped forward. Mr. Ellis, you told investigators in 1958 you didn't remember anything. He smiled faintly. I didn't then, I do now. The ground talks when it rains. A chill threaded up Caroline's spine. The rain had started again, thin and whispering through the branches. Raymond Ellis turned back toward his truck. Before he climbed in, he said, There's a cellar under the east side of the house. Nobody ever sealed it. That's where you'll find the rest of them. The engine coughed to life, and the truck vanished down the lane. Polk stared after him. The east side collapsed years ago. There's nothing left. Caroline looked toward the sagging section of the foundation, where ivy crawled over broken stone. Maybe he's right, she said. Maybe there's something we haven't heard yet. She returned to her rental car as the light faded. In the back seat, her laptop glowed faintly. She pulled up the archived police photographs, grainy black and whites of the 1932 search. On one of them, a group of men stood around the same east wall Raymond had mentioned behind them, barely visible, a dark square cut into the earth. She zoomed in. There, half obscured by shadow, a wooden door. The caption read only, Area sealed for safety. Caroline closed the laptop slowly. Outside, the orchard was dark again, whispering in the wind. Somewhere beneath those trees, the ground still knocked, and the house remembered every sound. May 14th, 2025. Mill Creek, Kentucky. The storm that night hit like a confession. Thunder rolled through the hills, shaking loose what the earth still tried to hide by morning. The ground steamed under the returning sun, and the orchard looked freshly washed. Cleaner, but not innocent. Caroline arrived before the sheriff's team. She parked by the crumbling fence, boots sinking into mud. The farmhouse windows gleamed wet and dark, reflecting pieces of the orchard like broken glass. Somewhere beneath her feet was the cellar Raymond Ellis had spoken of. The rest of them, he'd said. His words had followed her through sleep. She stepped inside. The air still smelled of plaster and rain. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight, seeping through the cracks. She moved toward the eastern side, where the floor slanted downward. The boards here were soft, swollen from years of moisture. Her flashlight traced the seams, then caught on something, a line in the dust. Straight, deliberate. She knelt. The line wasn't a crack. It was the edge of a trap door, barely perceptible beneath a layer of grime. She ran her fingers along the edge until they met a small, rusted ring. "Raymond," she murmured, almost like a prayer. The wood resisted at first, groaning like an old hinge awakening. Then it lifted. A wave of cold air rose up, thick with the smell of wet stone and something metallic. She aimed her light downward. Stairs, narrow, uneven, swallowed by shadow. "Miss Vance!" Sheriff Polk's voice came from outside, cutting through the stillness. Caroline startled, losing her grip. The hatch slammed shut with a hollow thud. She stepped back, heart racing. Polk appeared in the doorway, a flashlight in hand. "You shouldn't be here alone." "I found it," Caroline said, pointing. "The cellar." Polk approached, shining her beam onto the floor. The ring glinted faintly. She crouched. Jesus, he wasn't lying. "I wanted to wait," Caroline lied. Her pulse was still in her throat. Polk radioed for backup. "We'll document and descend together if there's evidence down there. It's been waiting long enough." Within an hour, 2 deputies and a forensic tech arrived. They rigged floodlights and tested the staircase for stability. The first few steps held. Beyond that, darkness. Polk descended first, followed by the tech, then Caroline, recorder in hand. The air grew colder with each step, saturated with the smell of earth and mold. When her foot hit the packed dirt floor, she realized how deep it was. At least 12 feet below ground. The beams of light fanned out across the cellar walls. It wasn't large, maybe 12 by 15 feet, but it had been built with precision. Brick walls, hand-mortared. Wooden shelves along the far end. Some collapsed, others intact. Mason jars lined the shelves, sealed, unbroken, filled with murky liquid. The forensic tech leaned closer. "These aren't preserves," he murmured. Inside one jar floated a child's ribbon, blue faded to gray. Another held marbles, cracked and cloudy. A third contained something that looked like paper, folded tightly, edges curling with age. Caroline stepped closer. Her flashlight beam trembled. She recognized the fabric in the first jar, the pattern of daisies. She'd seen it in a photograph from 1932 Ada's dress. She swallowed hard. "They kept things," she said softly. "Trophies." Polk moved to the back wall. "There's something else here." Embedded into the bricks was a wooden beam. Carved into it were initials: A.M., J.E., and E.M., Ada, June, Ellis. Beneath them, newer letters, shakier, etched with a knife. "It wasn't supposed to be us." The words seemed to hum in the still air. Caroline felt her stomach tighten. The forensic tech began photographing. His flash illuminated something under the shelf. a small pile of fabric. When he lifted it, dust fell away, revealing a leather-bound book, waterlogged but intact. The cover had once been green, embossed on the front. Family Ledger, 1931 to 1932. Caroline's recorder caught her whisper. They kept records. Polk nodded toward the tech. Bag it carefully. We'll examine it upstairs. As they turned to leave, Caroline's light swept across the far corner and froze on a shape a depression in the dirt, no bigger than a small child. Inside it, something glimmered faintly, a single button catching the light. Her voice was barely a breath. "Sheriff." They uncovered it with gloved hands. The button belonged to a shoe, small, scuffed, with a strap across the top. When they lifted it, the heel came loose, exposing what had been hidden beneath, a sliver of bone, pale against the dark soil. Silence filled the cellar. Polk spoke quietly. "Call the coroner and seal the site." Caroline turned off her recorder. Her hands trembled. The cellar smelled of old secrets and the end of denial. The rain returned by late afternoon. They worked through it, documenting, photographing, collecting. By dusk, the first evidence bags were sealed and labeled. Caroline stood by her car, watching as the sheriff locked the farmhouse door behind them. Who would keep trophies? She asked. Who would keep a ledger of it? Polk's expression was unreadable. Maybe someone who needed to remember exactly what they did. Caroline looked back toward the orchard. The fog had begun to rise again, swallowing the lower branches in gray. For the first time, she wondered if the orchard's silence wasn't absence, but witness. When she finally drove back toward town, she saw something strange in her rearview mirror. A figure standing at the edge of the fence, small, still, wearing what looked like a pale blue dress. She blinked, and it was gone. That night, in her motel room, Caroline laid the photos out on the bed. The jars, the ledger, the carvings. The cellar felt alive even on paper. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. No message, just a photo attachment. She opened it. The image was grainy, black and white. A young girl smiling at the camera, holding a locket. The same locket they had found that morning. Beneath it, a single typed line. Not all of them were dead when they disappeared. The ledger dried overnight under forensic lights. By morning, it sat on a metal table inside the county sheriff's temporary evidence tent, its pages yellowed, curling at the edges like dried leaves. A faint smell of mildew clung to the air, mixed with coffee and rain. Caroline arrived just as Sheriff Polk flipped open the first page. Every entry was written in the same looping, practiced hand. Black ink, careful spacing, like someone documenting accounts for a store or a farm. But the titles told another story. January 3rd, 1932. Inventory, household labor. February 12th, compliance schedule. March 5th, results of correction. Polk read aloud. This doesn't read like a farm ledger, Polk said. It reads like a scorecard. No, Caroline said quietly. It sounds like a record of people. The pages listed initials instead of full names. A.M., J.E., E.M., and occasionally an unidentified R. Each entry logged tasks completed, hours observed, and remarks. Cold, detached notes like, A.M. failed recitation, correction required. What kind of correction? Polk asked. Caroline pointed to the next column. The handwriting grew smaller, slanted. A.M. refused to remain inside cellar, cried for mother. Correction administered by M.C. Polk's face hardened. M.C., she said. McCreary. Probably the father. They turned the page. The ink had bled from dampness, but a faint phrase was still visible across the top margin. To make them proper. Caroline's stomach turned. This isn't just discipline. He was documenting behavioral experiments. Polk frowned. Experiments? Look at the terminology. Compliance. Response to correction. Schedule. It's systematic, not punishment. Procedure. Polk exhaled, rubbing her temples. He was trying to fix them. The last legible entry was dated August 6, 1932, the night before the disappearance. AM, JE, and EM placed under orchard supervision. Final test scheduled for dawn. MC notes dissent from DM uncooperative. Replacement may be necessary, Caroline whispered. DM, Delia McCreary, the mother. She was arrested too, Polk said, for obstruction, but charges dropped after her death. She died that same year, Caroline murmured. Heart failure, they said. Polk's radio crackled from the corner table. A deputy's voice came through the static. Sheriff, you might want to step outside. We've got something in the orchard. Polk left without a word. Caroline stayed. She couldn't move. The words on the page swam before her eyes, but one phrase anchored her. Final test, scheduled for dawn. What test? She turned back a few pages, looking for patterns. Each entry ended with either obedient, stubborn, or revised. But the last column, written faintly in pencil, had numbers beside the names 1, 2, 3, and beside AM, the number 4 circled 3 times. Caroline ran her finger over it. The 4th, she whispered. The tent flap opened. Wind gusting through Polk's voice carried in. We found another cavity, under the oldest apple tree. Caroline closed the ledger and followed. The orchard shimmered under the returning sun. Mud glistened like oil. The excavation site had shifted 50 yards east, where the ground dipped around the roots of a massive apple tree. Deputies knelt in the soil, brushing away dirt from what looked like a wooden crate no larger than a suitcase. This was wrapped in burlap, one said, dated 1932 on the nails, found a second locket inside. Caroline crouched beside it. This locket was oval, brass, slightly dented. Inside was a photograph. 3 children standing in front of the same tree they'd just dug beneath, but someone had scratched an X across one face. Ellis. She felt the breath leave her lungs. He survived, she said. Raymond? Polk asked. Yes. Ellis was his middle name. He changed it after the trial. He was one of the children in this photo. Polk frowned. So the X? What does that mean? Maybe it means he wasn't supposed to survive. Polk called over a deputy. Get Raymond Ellis on the line. If he's still in Mill Creek, bring him in. By early evening, Caroline sat across from Raymond inside the sheriff's office. Rain streaked the window behind him, turning the glass into a moving blur. I told you there were more, he said. His hands shook as he set down a handkerchief. The orchard's roots grow over what's buried. They feed on it. Caroline leaned forward. Raymond, your father kept a ledger. He wrote about something called a test. His eyes fluttered shut. The Sunday lesson. What was it? He hesitated, voice thin. He made us kneel in the orchard at dawn, said God's light saw who was pure and who was weak. If you flinched when the sun hit your eyes, you failed. And then he stopped. Caroline's voice softened. And then what? He said the ground would take you back. Polk watched him carefully. You think he buried them alive? Raymond didn't answer. His eyes had drifted toward the rain, far away, trapped in the orchard again. There was singing, he whispered. Ma tried to stop him. That's why she died. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Caroline's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, one sentence. He wrote more than one ledger. Attached was a photograph. Another book, identical, lying open on what looked like a wooden table covered in dirt. The timestamp on the file read 2:17 a.m. Polk saw her expression. What is it? Someone's down there, Caroline said quietly. Someone who already knows what we're going to find next. That night, Caroline couldn't sleep. The motel walls felt thin, the silence too dense. She laid the ledger on the desk, its pages whispering when she turned them. On the inside cover, something caught her eye, a faint indentation beneath the paper, like writing pressed from another page. She held it under the lamp and shaded lightly with a pencil. Letters emerged, jagged and uneven. Not buried, planted. Outside, the wind lifted the curtains. The sound it made was almost like knocking. And somewhere in the orchard, under roots that had grown for nearly a century, something waited for light. May 16th, Mill Creek, Kentucky. By dawn, the fog rolled thick through the valley, a gray milk that swallowed the orchard whole. Caroline hadn't slept more than an hour. The pencil rubbing, not buried, planted, still hovered in her mind like a riddle. She left the motel before sunrise, camera bag slung over her shoulder, thermos of burnt coffee in hand. The road to the McCreary property was empty, except for mist curling across the gravel. Sheriff Polk was already there, standing beside a county truck. Her breath smoked in the chill. "Morning," she said. "You're early. I couldn't wait." Polk lifted a tarp from a pile of boards stacked near the shed. "We're shoring up the east wall. Soil's collapsing faster than expected." Caroline nodded toward the smaller outbuilding at the edge of the property, the orchard caretaker's shed. "That's still locked?" Polk followed her gaze. "Wasn't even on the blueprints. County bought the property after the arrests, turned it into storage. Nobody's been inside since the 50s. The padlock hung rusted, but intact. Caroline ran a thumb across it. "The message I got last night. The photo looked like this table." Polk arched a brow. "You're saying whoever sent it's been inside?" Caroline didn't answer. The lock crumbled after one hit from the bolt cutters. The door sighed open. Inside smelled of engine oil and damp cedar. Dust sheeted everything. The bench, the tool rack, the cracked window. But beneath the smell of rot was another scent, faint and metallic, like dried ink. Caroline swept her flashlight along the bench. On the far end sat a wooden crate, its lid half pried. Inside, neatly stacked, were bundles of paper tied with twine. She tugged one free. The cover was the same green leather as the first ledger. "Second volume," she whispered. Polk called for evidence bags. "We process it properly." But curiosity won first. Caroline eased the book open just enough to glimpse the first page. The handwriting was the same, but the tone had changed. September 12th, 1932. Continuation of Orchard Record. Phase 2 begins without DM. Her resistance noted. New subjects pending. Caroline's mouth went dry. Phase 2, Caroline read. Like the first 3 children were a trial run. Polk leaned over her shoulder. He kept going after the disappearances. Caroline turned another page. Several entries had been slashed through in red pencil. The final note read, October 1st. Roots accepted the offering. The ground hums again. She closed the ledger slowly. He believed the orchard was alive. Or guilty, Polk said. Either way, he wrote like a man who'd lost his mind. They brought the ledger back to the sheriff's tent. Forensics began photographing, scanning, tagging. Caroline stood aside, watching the pages projected onto a monitor. Each entry was stranger than the last. Phrases like, "The soil breathes," "Obedience through burial," "New growth noted near Eastern Row," and always, always the same 3 letters at the bottom of the page. R. A. Polk frowned. "That's not McCreary's initials?" Caroline thought back to Raymond Ellis's tremor-soft voice. "He made us kneel in the orchard at dawn." What if R.A. was someone helping him? An assistant or a witness, Caroline said. Someone who stayed behind after he was arrested. The forensic tech looked up. "There's dried resin in the paper fibers. Not ink, sap. From applewood." Caroline felt a prickle along her arms. The ledgers had literally absorbed the orchard by afternoon. Polk left to file preliminary reports with the state task force. Caroline stayed behind, cataloging photographs. She moved to the window for air. The orchard shimmered under late-day light. wet leaves flashing silver. Then she saw movement near the far shed. Someone stepping between the trees, too tall to be a child, wearing a rain slicker. She grabbed her camera and stepped outside. The figure vanished around the trunk. "Hello?" she called. Only the sound of dripping branches answered. She crossed to where she'd seen them. Mud sucked at her shoes. On the ground lay footprints, fresh, deep, and a scrap of paper pressed into the mud. She lifted it carefully. It was a page torn from the second ledger, edges damp, writing blurred but legible. "Do not wake what she planted. The roots won't know you're not hers." A twig snapped behind her. She turned, camera raised, but nothing moved except the orchard. Rows and rows of trees, silent, staring back. That evening at the motel, Caroline spread both ledgers on the bed. The first ended the night before the disappearance. The second began a month later, after the arrests. Someone had continued the records long after McCreary should have been in custody. She opened her laptop and searched county archives again. After 3 false leads, she found it. A caretaker hired by the state in late 1932 to maintain the seized property. Ruth Ann McCreary Polks Ray, Delia's sister, the aunt no one ever questioned. Caroline scrolled through the microfiche photo attached to the record. A woman in a plain dress, standing beside the orchard, eyes narrowed against the sun. In her hands, pruning shears. Behind her, the same massive tree where they'd found the crate. Caroline's phone buzzed. A new message, same unknown number. She kept planting. "Look under the caretaker's shed." She looked toward the window. Across the dark field, a single light glowed in the direction of the orchard, faint, flickering, like someone carrying a lantern. She grabbed her flashlight and recorder. Her pulse drummed steady as thunder. The night air was thick with dew. Frogs croaked from the creek. When she reached the shed, the door was still ajar from earlier, the air inside colder than the night itself. She swept her light across the floor. One of the planks near the back wall bowed slightly under her weight. She knelt. Beneath the board, soil, and beneath the soil, cloth. She peeled back the dirt inch by inch until the beam of light caught glass, ajar, sealed, filled with pale liquid. Inside floated a coil of hair, blonde, tied with ribbon. On the lid, scratched letters, R.A.M., Ruth Ann McCreary. Caroline whispered, "You weren't keeping records, you were keeping roots." Her phone vibrated again. No text this time, just an audio file automatically downloading. She played it. A woman's voice crackled through static, low and breathless. "They think the children died, but the orchard took them. It wanted more. It always wants more." The file ended with a single sound. Knocking. 4 times. Caroline stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. Outside, the wind moved through the branches with a whisper that almost sounded like breathing somewhere beneath the shed. The earth shifted, and the orchard waited for dawn. May 17th. Mill Creek. The morning broke colorless and still. The orchard, washed by a night of thin rain, shimmered with a kind of restrained calm, as if it had taken a long breath and was now waiting to exhale. Caroline walked the perimeter tape with Sheriff Polk, boots sinking in the softened earth. "State forensics will be here by noon," Polk said. "They'll pull the jar you found under the shed. We'll log it as biological evidence." Caroline nodded but kept staring at the tree line. The previous night's voice message echoed in her head. They think the children died, but the orchard took them. She hadn't told Polk about it. Not yet. Not until she understood what it meant. They reached the caretaker's shed again. The forensic techs had marked the floorboards with chalk and left the jars sealed inside a cooler. Caroline crouched near the spot and brushed away loose dirt. The soil was strangely light. Not loam, but ash mixed with clay. She pressed a handful between her fingers. It smelled faintly sweet, like dried apples. "Sheriff," she said softly. This isn't just dirt, she said. It's what's left of somebody. Polk joined her. Fertilizer, maybe? Caroline shook her head. This is human ash. Someone burned something here long ago and tilled it back into the ground. Polk's jaw tightened. Ruth Ann? Caroline looked up. I think she kept the orchard alive the only way she knew how. At county records that afternoon, Caroline combed through a gray box labeled Property Holdings 1932 to 1938. Most pages were brittle, carbon-copied deeds typed in fading violet ink. Near the bottom, a small folded affidavit caught her eye. Caretaker contract. Ruth Ann McCreary. Signed October 15, 1932. She read aloud quietly. In exchange for maintaining the orchard, R.A. McCreary will ensure continued soil integrity and supervise remaining miners until relocation, all planting to follow guidance of Dr. I. Corbin. She froze on the name. Dr. Corbin, she whispered. No one had mentioned a doctor before. She turned the page. Attached was a letter on crisp stationery, stamped St. Augustine Institute for Child Development, Lexington, Kentucky. Miss McCreary, your observations from the orchard are invaluable. Continue documenting root growth correlation with emotional stimuli. Phase 3 commences upon receipt of subjects. Caroline's hands trembled. This wasn't superstition, she murmured. This was an experiment. She scanned the signature. Dr. Isaac Corbin, Director. The name was typed, but the pen flourish beneath was unmistakably feminine. That evening, she met Polk at the motel cafe. Steam rose from their coffee cups. The rain outside ticked against the window. St. Augustine, Polk repeated after hearing what Caroline had found. I know that name. They ran state homes during the Depression. Behavioral reform. All shut down in the 40s. They used the McCreary farm as a site, Caroline said, and Ruth Ann was their caretaker. Why bury the kids? Polk asked. Caroline shook her head slowly. Not bury, plant. They thought trauma could be trained out like a weed emotional stimuli, the letter said. The orchard was the laboratory. Polk leaned back. So the doctor, Corbin, was running it. Ruth Ann was her field worker. Caroline hesitated. There's more. The signature on the letter, Isaac Corbin, but the handwriting's female. Polk frowned. So who was she hiding from? They sat in silence for a long moment while the rain built to a steady hiss. Finally, Polk, he said, you realize if this is true, the state's complicit. Caroline's phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time, a single text. Ask the Roots about the doctor. She showed it to Polk. Somebody's watching us, Polk said. Caroline swallowed. Or someone who never left. They returned to the orchard at dusk. The forensics team had cleared out. Only the floodlights remained, casting the trees in hard silver. Polk parked near the fence and handed Caroline a pair of gloves. Let's finish what we started. They pried up the remaining floorboards inside the shed. Under the second layer of planks was another cloth bundle, smaller, wrapped tight with twine. Inside lay a notebook sealed in waxed paper. Unlike the ledgers, this one was delicate, pages covered in looping fluid handwriting. The first line, Ruth Ann McCreary, personal record, 1933. Polk exhaled. You found her diary? Caroline turned to the first full entry. The doctor says the soil sings when it's fed properly. She says obedience grows best when tended by guilt. I do what she asks because the children's voices never stopped. They tap when it rains. Another page. The Roots moved again last night. I saw a face beneath the apple tree. I think it was Ada. The doctor said not to speak her name. Names make them restless. Caroline's throat tightened. The handwriting grew more erratic further in. Lines slanted upward, ink blotted. She comes every month from Lexington. Brings jars and little knives. Says we're close to understanding how memory grows. She calls it the bloom. Polk whispered, My God. The final entry was dated October 4th, 1933. She told me to prepare 3 more beds, said the first crop was successful, but the ground cries now. I hear them every night, knocking under the trees. I think the orchard wants me next. Caroline closed the diary, fingers shaking. She didn't last much longer. Records say Ruth Ann disappeared in 34. Polk nodded grimly. Guess the orchard took its caretaker. They sealed the diary in evidence bags. Outside, wind rattled the branches, heavy with unpicked fruit. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something else, the copper tang of sap. As they locked the shed, a low creak rippled through the orchard. One of the oldest trees tilted ever so slightly, roots exposed just enough to show what lay tangled among them. A strip of cloth, the color of a faded nurse's uniform. Caroline's flashlight caught the faint outline of embroidered letters on the hem. I see, she whispered. Isaac Corbin. Polk stared. So the doctor's still here? Maybe not alive, Caroline said, but she never left. That night, back in her motel, Caroline listened again to the old voice recording, the one found on her phone. Through the static, she heard a second voice layered faintly beneath the first. She slowed the playback, adjusted the pitch. 2 voices, one pleading, one calm, instructing. Obedience through memory, the calm voice said. Every root remembers its fruit. The second voice sobbed. Please, I'm still here. Caroline pressed a stop. The silence after was unbearable. She looked out the window. Across the dark field, the floodlights were off now. Only the orchard glowed faintly under the moon. For a moment, she thought she saw movement again. Something shifting under the soil, slow, circular, like breath. The ground hummed, and the orchard remembered everything. May 18th, Lexington, Kentucky. The archives building sat behind the old university hospital, a windowless block of sandstone with the air of a place that preferred to forget what it held. Caroline signed in under a gray sky that threatened rain. Her badge read, Investigative Researcher, Mill Creek Inquiry. The clerk barely looked at it. The file she'd requested waited on a cart marked Restricted, St. Augustine Institute, 1929 to 1934. It was heavier than she expected. Faded folders, photographs, yellowed carbon copies, all brittle ghosts of bureaucracy. She carried the stack to a quiet table by the microfilm readers. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The first folder held faculty rosters. There it was, Dr. Isaac Corbin, Director of Behavioral Development. A passport photo paperclipped to the page showed a woman in her 30s, hair pulled tight, eyes dark and steady. Below her printed title, someone had scrawled in pencil, Isa Corbin, do not correspond. Caroline's stomach tightened. Isa, not Isaac. She flipped the page. The next document was a letterhead memo dated March 1932. To Field Director R.A. McCreary. Phase 1 of orchard study proceeding under satisfactory conditions. Subject response promising. Continue planting schedule as outlined in Chart B. Ensure emotional triggers remain consistent. Remember, growth requires loss. The signature matched the one from the caretaker's file. Caroline exhaled slowly. She hid behind a man's name to run her program. By noon, she'd read through half the box. The deeper she went, the darker it became. A series of progress reports detailed something called the Bloom sequence, a method of conditioning children through sensory deprivation and isolation to cultivate obedience. Each phase used symbols drawn from nature: water, root, fruit, light. But the 5th phase, labeled root integration, was redacted almost entirely. Only one phrase remained visible through the black ink. Subject 4 demonstrated permanent assimilation with substrate. Caroline stared at the words until they blurred permanent assimilation. Not death, not burial. A word people use when they don't want to say consumed. Her recorder clicked on. May 18th, 2:41 p.m., she whispered. Dr. Isa Corbin used the McCreary orchard to test a theory that memory and obedience could be transferred into the natural environment through ritualized trauma. The children weren't just victims. They were, she hesitated, unable to finish. Something moved in the quiet behind her. A chair creaked, then silence again. Caroline turned. A man in a maintenance uniform was sweeping the far aisle, eyes down, rhythm steady. She returned to the file, but a chill had settled in her spine. The last folder was labeled Field Imagery, 1932. Inside were sepia photographs printed on glossy stock. Each depicted a child standing near an orchard tree. Some smiled, some didn't. On the backs were not names but words: obedient, stubborn, defective. The final photo was different. It showed a woman, Isa Corbin herself, kneeling by a sapling. The ground around it was freshly turned. The photo's back read, "Bloom achieved." Caroline packed her notes, slid the folder back, and checked her watch for 10 p.m. Outside, the rain had started. A cold, insistent drizzle that made the city shine like mercury. She called Sheriff Polk as she walked to her car. She wasn't just a doctor, Caroline said. She was the architect of what happened to them. Polk's voice crackled through the static. Architect of what? Whatever the McCrearys called obedience. She named it the bloom. Polk exhaled. You sound like you're saying it's still happening. Caroline looked across the parking lot. A figure in a yellow rain slicker stood by the far exit sign, unmoving. The same shape she'd seen in the orchard days earlier. Sheriff, she said quietly, I think someone's making sure it doesn't stop. That night, Caroline returned to Mill Creek. The storm had followed her south, washing the road in silver ribbons. When she reached the orchard, the power was out. The sheriff's floodlights dark. Only the moon glowed through the clouds, turning the trees into a skeletal congregation. She parked, grabbed her flashlight, and crossed to the shed. The air smelled sharp, ozone and something faintly sweet. Near the base of the first apple tree, soil had been disturbed again. Someone had been digging. She knelt and shone the light closer. The hole wasn't new. It was old, but freshly uncovered. Roots tangled across its edges like veins. In the center lay a small wooden box. She brushed away the dirt and lifted the lid. Inside was a reel-to-reel tape. Label, The Bloom. Final sequence. Caroline's breath caught. The old generator still sat under the shed workbench. She hooked up a portable player, connected the reel, and pressed play. A hiss filled the shed. Then Isa Corbin's voice, soft, deliberate, unnervingly calm. They believe death ends the lesson, but roots remember what flesh forgets. When obedience grows deep enough, the child and the tree become one. The orchard will never die as long as they remain planted. Another voice, young, trembling, whispered something inaudible. Then the sound of digging, then crying. Caroline's hand flew to the stop button. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The shed suddenly felt smaller, the air too close. She looked out the window toward the orchard. Something moved between the trees. A shape, human-sized, bent and shifting like it didn't know how to walk upright anymore. The beam of her flashlight caught it for a second. A pale face, eyes open, mouth full of soil. Then it was gone. She stumbled outside, scanning the rows, but the orchard had fallen silent again. Only rain dripping through leaves, only the wind. Caroline backed toward the car, adrenaline still sharp. The words from the recording spinning in her head. Roots remember what flesh forgets. Behind her, somewhere deep among the trees, came a sound, slow, wet. The unmistakable creak of wood bending under weight, followed by a whisper, almost a voice carried by the wind. The bloom has begun again. At dawn, Sheriff Polk arrived to find Caroline sitting on the porch steps of the farmhouse, soaked and shaking. She clutched the reel in her lap. "It's her," Caroline said hoarsely. "Corbin, her voice. She called it the bloom." Polk crouched beside her. "We'll send it to the lab." Caroline's eyes were glassy. "She didn't stop in 33. She planted herself here. The roots, they feed on memory." Polk frowned. "You're saying she, what, became part of it?" Caroline looked up, rain dripping from her hair. "Look around you. Every tree that's still alive is from her generation. She's been feeding this place for 90 years. Behind them, the orchard swayed in the morning wind, leaves trembling like 1,000 tiny hands. The bloom wasn't over. It was blooming again. May 19th. Mill Creek, Kentucky. The orchard was cordoned off by dawn. Yellow tape rippled between the trees like a warning whispered to the wind Sheriff Polk had called in the State Archaeological Forensics Unit. Vans lined the gravel road, their headlights cutting through early mist. Caroline stood beside the largest tree, the one locals called the mother tree, its trunk twisted upward like a rope of petrified muscle. Beneath it, the soil bulged unnaturally, forming a shallow mound. "Ground radar says there's a void beneath it," Polk said, reading the technician's report. "About 8 feet down, roughly circular." "Like a cistern?" Caroline asked. The tech shook his head. "More like a chamber, wooden lining, possibly hand-built." Caroline felt the cold crawl of inevitability down her spine. The orchard remembers what flesh forgets. Polk nodded to the crew. "Start careful, shovels only." By mid-morning, the excavation had exposed a hatch of weathered planks interlaced with roots. The air seeping from the opening carried a damp, sweet stench, soil mixed with rot and apple fermentation. Caroline crouched near the edge. "That smell," she said. "It's not decomposition, it's fermentation. Something's been preserved down there." The techs pried the hatch open. A puff of air hissed out, thick as breath. Beneath it, a narrow shaft descended into darkness. "We'll need respirators," Polk ordered. Ropes were lowered. Caroline volunteered first. Polk frowned. "You don't have to go down there." "I do," Caroline said. "It started with me reading the files. It should end with me seeing it." She clipped on the harness, adjusted her mask, and descended. The shaft walls were lined with wood and clay, smoothed like a cellar but reinforced by something else. Roots twisted through every seam, their pale tendrils pulsing faintly under her light. Moisture dripped in slow rhythms, almost like breathing. When her boots touched bottom, she found herself in a chamber no wider than a small bedroom. Wooden shelves clung to the walls, covered in glass jars filled with amber liquid. Some contained clumps of hair, others tiny teeth, others things too deformed to name. In the center stood a chair, identical to the one from Asa Corbin's hidden sub-level in Lexington, bolted to the floor. On the chair's seat lay a notebook sealed in wax. Caroline unwrapped it carefully. Inside, the first page was a letter written in a looping, graceful hand. "To whoever finds this, you must understand. I was not killing them. I was preserving what could not survive in this world. The government wanted obedience. I wanted remembrance. The children were not lost. They were rooted." Polk's voice echoed faintly from above. "Caroline, status." She barely heard. Her flashlight swept across the far wall. Carvings in the wood. Dozens of small handprints pressed into the grain, blackened with sap beneath them. Words etched deep. "We stay." Caroline whispered, "Oh God." Another movement caught her eye. One of the roots pulsed again, this time visibly, the surface shifting as though something beneath the bark was trying to move. She stepped closer. Inside the translucent sapwood, something glimmered. A sliver of bone, small and curved, caught mid-swallow. She stumbled backward. "They're in the roots," she whispered. "They're bones." The notebook slipped from her hands, pages spilling open to the last entry. The bloom completes when memory replaces marrow. The roots drink what we cannot carry. In this way, they remain children forever. The air around her thickened. Her head swam with the smell of fermentation and earth she called up weakly. "I need to come out." Polk's voice came faintly. "Copy that. Haul her up." The harness tightened. The chamber fell away beneath her boots. As she rose, the beam of her flashlight caught one final shape carved into the wall. A butterfly, split in half. Back above ground, Caroline ripped off her respirator and gulped air. Her skin was gray, streaked with dirt and sweat. "What was it?" Polk asked. "Everything," Caroline said hoarsely. "The jars, the chair, the writings. She used the children's remains as graphs. Fed the orchard with them." Polk rubbed her forehead. "That's not science. That's desecration." "She believed it was science," Caroline said. "She thought memory could grow. She wanted them to live through the roots." The techs began bagging evidence, lowering cameras. Caroline sat on a fallen trunk, trembling. She looked out at the orchard, each tree still and heavy with unharvested fruit. "What if she was right?" Caroline said softly. Polk turned to her. "Right about what?" "About memory," Caroline said. "About roots remembering. We've been pulling bones from this ground for weeks, and every time we dig, the orchard gets stronger, healthier. The leaves have doubled since Monday." Polk's expression hardened. "You think the trees are feeding off it?" "I think they're responding to being remembered." A gust of wind rippled through the branches. For a moment, the sound resembled children laughing, faint, overlapping, distant. Both women froze. Then it was gone. That night, Caroline couldn't drive away. She parked beside the orchard and sat in silence. The moon hung low, casting silver veins across the trees. She replayed the real recording through her headphones again. Issa Corbin's voice filled her ears. "Roots remember what flesh forgets. The bloom must be tended. If neglected, the orchard hungers." Caroline whispered, "You're dead." Then, faintly through the static, another voice answered. The same soft child's voice she'd heard in the earlier recordings. "We're not." The audio player sputtered and died. The orchard fell utterly still. She stepped out of the car, flashlight in hand. A low hum drifted from the soil, rhythmic, pulsing. When she knelt, she realized it wasn't coming from the ground. It was beneath it. The hum grew into vibration. The roots nearest the excavation began to twitch, small movements like muscle spasms. The earth itself seemed to breathe, Caroline whispered into her recorder. "May 19th, 11:04 p.m. The orchard is responding. I think the roots are alive." Something cracked behind her, a branch splitting under weight. She turned her flashlight. For one fleeting instant, she saw a shape half risen from the soil, small, humanoid, covered in bark. Its eyes hollow but reflecting light like mirrors. Then it sank back beneath the roots, leaving only ripples of disturbed soil. Caroline staggered backward, breath shallow. The orchard settled again into silence, but the air now smelled unmistakably of fresh sap and something else. Apples, dozens of them, ripening all at once. She looked up. Every tree glistened with fruit, round and heavy, red as new blood, and when the wind passed through them, the sound it made wasn't rustling. It was whispering. May 20th, Mill Creek, Kentucky. By morning, the orchard was no longer silent. It creaked. Branches rubbed against each other like restless limbs. The scent of fermenting apples hung thick in the damp air, heady and metallic. Sheriff Polk stood near the excavation site, staring at the impossible. The trees closest to the uncovered chamber had bloomed overnight, pale blossoms where there had been only leaves the day before. "This isn't natural," she said. Caroline, pale from exhaustion, adjusted her recorder. It's reactive. Issa Corbin's writings talked about memory through root networks. I think the orchard is waking up. Polk's deputy crossed himself. Ma'am, that's not a thing. Trees don't wake up. Caroline said nothing, her gaze fixed on the mother tree, its bark pulsing faintly, almost imperceptibly, like a heartbeat under skin. The state forensics team had arrived before dawn. Their scanners hummed over the soil, sending sonar waves into the roots. The readout returned fractured, unreadable images, like static interference, the technician said. Signal won't penetrate deeper than 6 feet. It's like something's absorbing the scan. Polk frowned. Absorbing? The tech nodded. It's not bouncing back. It's being taken in. By noon, a storm gathered. The sky dimmed to slate. The crew set up a tent for the dig, but the wind howled so hard the canvas snapped like a living thing. Caroline huddled with Polk under the farmhouse eave, watching the orchard sway. They're connected underground, Caroline said. A mycorrhizal network, roots exchanging nutrients, even signals. What if memory really does move through it? Corbin may have used that to preserve the children's minds. Polk shook her head. That's not preservation, that's entrapment. Rain began to fall, soaking the ground. It hissed against the apple blossoms, turning them translucent. Then, all at once, the wind died. Caroline stepped forward. Do you hear that? Polk listened. The orchard had gone perfectly still. Even the rain seemed muted. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound rose from below the soil, rhythmic, deliberate, echoing from tree to tree like a code. Polk drew her gun instinctively. That's coming from under us, Caroline whispered. They're knocking again. The ground near the mother tree heaved slightly, just enough to send ripples through the wet earth. A root broke the surface, pale and slick like bone. The technician shouted from across the site. Ma'am, the scanner's reading movement. How much? Polk called. He stared at the monitor, wide-eyed. All of it. The entire orchard's moving. They retreated to the farmhouse while the storm swelled. The windows rattled. Rain slammed the roof like fists. Caroline sat by the old parlor window, staring out at the shifting trees. Their branches bowed and twisted toward one another. Forming dark arches against the lightning, Polk paced behind her. We've got to quarantine the site. Nobody comes within a mile until we get geologists out here. Caroline didn't answer. She was reading again from the wax-sealed notebook she'd taken from the underground chamber. The pages glistened faintly, as if they'd absorbed moisture. Or something else. Listen to this, she said softly. The orchard will hunger when the bloodlines fade. The roots require kin to continue the bloom. Polk frowned. Kin. Caroline turned the book toward her. The McCreary bloodline. Every generation. That's why the trees survive when nothing else grows here. Polk sank into the chair opposite her. You're saying it wants descendants? Caroline nodded slowly. It feeds on them. On their memory. Thunder cracked outside. The lights flickered. The orchard flashed white in the lightning, then dark again. But in that split instant, Caroline saw something impossible. Figures standing among the trees, dozens of them, pale as bark, small as children. When the next flash came, they were gone. She whispered, They're waiting for someone to remember them. By nightfall, the rain stopped. A humid fog rolled through the orchard, turning it silver under moonlight. Polk insisted on keeping watch. Caroline refused to leave. They sat on the farmhouse steps with thermoses of coffee, listening to the slow dripping of water from branches. Polk broke the silence. You know, when I was a kid, my grandmother used to tell stories about this place, said the apples had souls. I always thought she was just being poetic. Maybe she wasn't, Caroline said. From somewhere deep in the orchard came a low groan. Wood grinding against wood. Then the sound of fruit dropping, dozens at once. thudding softly into the mud. Caroline rose and walked toward the trees. Polk followed, hand on her flashlight. The fallen apples glistened in the moonlight. Caroline knelt and picked one up. It was warm. When she turned it over, her breath caught. Embedded faintly beneath the translucent skin was the impression of a small face, eyes closed, lips parted, peaceful. She dropped it. Dear God. Another apple rolled toward her boot. This one was split open, revealing not seeds, but tiny teeth, perfectly formed. Polk gagged. We're leaving, now. But before they could move, a sound rose through the orchard, an endless, shivering whisper. Not words exactly, but the rhythm of voices trying to form them. Caroline clutched her recorder. May 20th, 11:59 p.m. The orchard is speaking. The ground beneath the mother tree began to buckle, soil collapsing inward like a sinkhole. Roots writhed from the opening, twisting together until they formed the outline of a human figure, tall, slender, feminine. Caroline whispered, Isa. The shape leaned forward, its voice emerging like breath through leaves. The bloom must never die. Polk fired a warning shot. The figure shattered into bark and dust, scattering across the roots. The orchard screamed, a long, tearing moan of wind through every branch. Apples burst open like blisters, spilling red pulp into the mud. Caroline fell to her knees, covering her ears. It's remembering too fast, she shouted. Then, just as suddenly, the sound stopped. The trees went still again. Rain began to fall, gentle this time, washing the pulp into the soil. Polk reached down to help her up. You all right? Caroline nodded weakly, soaked in sweat and rain. It's hungry, she whispered. We woke it, and now it wants more. At dawn, the orchard looked serene again. Sunlight cut through the mist. The apples hung heavy and red. Perfect. Nothing in sight hinted at the nightmare of the night before. Except one thing. The soil around the mother tree had split open just enough to reveal something pale beneath the roots. A human hand, slender and adult. Fingers curled upward as if reaching for light. Polk swallowed hard. That's not a child. Caroline's voice was barely audible. It's her, Isa Corbin. She turned off her recorder, trembling. She fed the orchard with herself. Behind them, the wind rose again, carrying the faintest whisper through the leaves. Roots remember. May 21st. Mill Creek, Kentucky. The air held its breath. Morning light slanted through thinning mist as the forensic crew gathered around the mother tree. Dew beaded on the leaves like sweat. Caroline stood behind Sheriff Polk, camera hanging loose at her side. Neither woman spoke. The pale fingers visible beneath the roots had stiffened overnight, their skin tight as parchment, nails pearly and clean. Too clean. Polk nodded to the technician. Start slow. No saws. The crew began to cut around the exposed section, careful to preserve the roots that curled over the arm like veins over bone. The smell that rose wasn't rot. It was sweet, vegetal, like sap and iron blended together. Preservation, Caroline murmured. It's embalmed in the tree. Polk shot her a glance. You think the orchard did that? Caroline didn't answer. She watched as the crew uncovered more. A forearm, then a shoulder, then part of a torso wrapped in fibers that looked more like bark than cloth. When the head finally came free, the breath went out of the clearing. The face was unmistakably female. Familiar from grainy photographs, now rendered in sap and skin, her features were delicate. Skin stretched tight but intact. Wisps of silver hair clung to her scalp. Around her neck hung a chain of apple blossoms, dried but still fragrant. Caroline whispered, Isa Corbin. One of the technicians cursed softly. Christ, it's like she's part of it. Polk crouched beside the body. Get samples to the lab. DNA, tissue, whatever's left. Caroline knelt too, studying the way the roots had fused to the flesh. Thin tendrils entered through the skin and vanished beneath, as if veins and wood had traded places. She fed herself to it, Caroline said. The integration she wrote about, it wasn't metaphor. She meant it literally. The technician looked pale. If she's been here since 1933, decomposition should have reduced her to dust. But this is fresh. She's alive in the botanical sense. The tree's been keeping her stable. Polk straightened. Stable how? Living tissue exchange, he said faintly. The root system's replacing her cells. A shudder moved through Caroline. She's part of the network. They transferred the remains to the coroner's van by noon, sealed inside a climate-controlled capsule. But as the van pulled away, one of the younger deputies pointed back at the hole. "Sheriff, the roots, they're moving again." Polk turned. The roots left behind had already begun to knit themselves back together, closing the cavity like a wound. Within minutes, the opening was gone. Only smooth soil remained. Polk whispered, "It's protecting itself." Caroline said, "No, it's grieving." That evening, Caroline joined Polk at the county morgue. The coroner, Dr. Ames, met them at the door. "You might want to see this," he said grimly. Under bright light, Isa Corbin's body looked both human and not. Her skin shimmered faintly, a pattern of fine green veins tracing her arms. The scent of apple blossoms hung faintly in the sterile room. Ames pointed with gloved fingers. Her blood has been replaced by a sap-like fluid, high in sugars and enzymes, internal organs, partially converted to plant matter. There's chlorophyll in her tissue. Caroline stared. She turned herself into the orchard. Ames nodded. "It's the strangest preservation I've ever seen." He stepped aside, revealing the right hand. The fingers were curled tightly around something. He pried them open carefully. A small seed fell into the tray. Smooth, dark, pulsing faintly with heat, Caroline's breath caught. She left a new seed. Polk leaned close. "Bag it. I don't want it anywhere near the orchard." But before Ames could move, the seed rolled off the tray and hit the floor with a soft click. It split cleanly in half, and a thin green shoot emerged, curling toward the light. Caroline stumbled back. "It's germinating," Polk barked. "Contain it, now!" Ames dropped a steel lid over the sprout beneath it. The tiny stem twitched once, then went still. The air smelled briefly of apples and smoke. Outside, the rain returned, steady and cold. Caroline leaned against the wall beside the exit, shaking. "It's not over," she said. "She left a way to start again." Polk's voice was quiet. "We'll destroy the seed." "You can't," Caroline said. "If it's linked to the others, burning it might—" "Cause what?" Polk demanded. Caroline hesitated. "Make the orchard scream." Polk looked away. "Tomorrow we burn it all anyway." Back at the motel, Caroline sat on the bed surrounded by evidence photos. Isa Corbin's face stared up from the prints, serene, unblinking. The pattern of roots on her skin mirrored the layout of the orchard. She realized, with a jolt, that each major tree aligned perfectly with the placement of the missing children's names in the original ledger. 4 primary trees. 4 subjects. She whispered, "Ada, June, Ellis, and Isa." Her phone buzzed again. No number, just another message. "You found her, now find yourself." Attached was a photo. Caroline standing at the edge of the orchard that very morning. The angle was from inside the trees. She froze. Someone, or something, had been watching her. Then, before she could react, the motel lights flickered, and the room filled with the sharp, sweet reek of apples ripening too fast. A soft knock, knock, knock echoed from the walls. Caroline whispered, "No." The sound came again, louder, from the door this time. She rose slowly, recorder in hand. "Who's there?" Silence. She opened the door. The hallway was empty, except for a single apple lying on the carpet, pale green, freshly picked. Her initials, CV, were carved into its skin. She dropped it instantly. The apple rolled once, split open. Inside, a seed pulsed faintly. Alive, Caroline whispered into the recorder, voice shaking. May 21st, 11:57 p.m. The orchard knows my name. At dawn, Sheriff Polk's radio crackled with static. A deputy's voice came through, panicked. "Sheriff, you'd better get back here. The orchard. There's new growth everywhere. Dozens of saplings, none of them where we planted." Polk's hand tightened around the radio. "What kind of saplings?" The voice answered, trembling. "Human-shaped." Polk closed her eyes. The orchard had begun to bloom again. And this time, it had remembered everyone. May 22nd. Mill Creek Orchard, Kentucky. The orchard was already burning when Caroline and Sheriff Polk arrived. Not with flame, but with light. Thin columns rising from the roots. A phosphorescent glow pulsing through the soil, like veins of molten gold. Smoke curled low over the hills. The rain had stopped before dawn, leaving the ground slick and steaming. Polk stepped out of her truck and pulled the fireproof jacket tight across her shoulders. Behind her, a line of volunteer firefighters waited for the order. She looked at Caroline. "Last chance to stop this." Caroline shook her head. "If we wait any longer, it spreads. Then we burn it to the ground." They moved together toward the perimeter. Gasoline drums lined the fence. The crew had already cut trenches around the roots of the 4 main trees. Each trench glimmered faintly with seepage, not oil, but sap. Sweet, amber, almost luminous Caroline crouched beside one, pressing a gloved hand to the earth. It was warm. Beneath her palm, something thudded once, like a slow heartbeat. "She's still down there," Caroline whispered. Polk didn't answer. She struck the flare. Flame raced through the trench with a roar, circling the orchard's edge, devouring the underbrush. The sound was a rush of wind and cracking wood, until it wasn't. The fire began to hum. A low tone, deep and harmonic, rolled through the air. The trunks shimmered, their bark splitting in long seams. From each rupture, steam poured out, carrying a smell of fruit and iron. "Jesus," a firefighter murmured, "it's singing." The sound built into a single droning note, high and mournful, as if the trees themselves were calling for something. Then the wind shifted, and the flames leapt inward. The orchard didn't just burn, it fought back. Branches twisted, lowering themselves like arms. Leaves flashed in bursts of green fire. The blaze reversed course, sucking oxygen inward. The flames coiled up the trunks and blossomed into shapes. Faces, eyes, open mouths gasping through the smoke. Caroline staggered backward, covering her mouth. "It's showing us them." Through the veil of flame, silhouettes formed. 3 small figures holding hands beneath a canopy of light. Ada, June, Ellis, the vanished cousins. Their outlines glowed for an instant before melting into the smoke. "They're in the trees," Caroline said. "All of them?" Polk raised the radio to her mouth. "Pull back! Everyone clear the line!" But before she could finish, the nearest trunk split open with a wet crack. Something fell out, not a branch, but a body. Charred, delicate, curled like a child in sleep. Then another, and another. The orchard was exhaling its dead. "Get the coroner out here," Polk gasped. "Now!" Caroline moved forward despite the heat. The bodies weren't decomposed. They were preserved, skin ashen but intact, each clutching a small object, a seed, a ribbon, a scrap of fabric. They looked peaceful, almost chosen. "This is what she meant," Caroline whispered. "She was saving them." A crack split the sky. Lightning struck the far hill, igniting a new patch of forest. The fire jumped the line. The orchard howled. Caroline grabbed Polk's arm. We have to stop the resonance, the hum. It's feeding on itself. How? Caroline looked toward the coroner's van. Inside a sealed container lay the seed found in Isa Corbin's hand. That's the source. It's still alive. She sprinted for the van. Polk swore and followed. Inside, the air was thick with sap vapor. The container vibrated on the table. Hairline cracks crawled across its steel surface. A dull glow leaked from within. Caroline shouted over the hum. If it breaks, it roots again. We have to end it. Polk drew her sidearm. Step back. She fired 3 rounds into the container. Each shot rang like a bell. The hum faltered, dropped an octave, then ceased. The orchard outside exhaled in unison, a long, trembling sigh. The light in the trees dimmed. Flames settled into ordinary fire. No more faces, just smoke. For a moment it was silent. Then, faintly, through the hiss of the dying blaze, came a child's voice, not from the orchard, from behind them. Caroline turned. The back door of the van stood open. A little girl stood in the frame, hair white as ash, eyes too bright. Her dress was from another time. She held an apple in her hands. Are you Caroline? The girl asked softly. Caroline's voice broke. Who are you? The girl smiled faintly. We were waiting for you. She said you'd come back. Who said that? Isa. She planted me. Polk stepped forward, hand hovering near her holster. Sweetheart, you need to... But before she could finish, the girl crumbled into ash, scattering like smoke. In her place lay an apple seed. Black and gleaming, Caroline stared down at it. She's reborn, she whispered. The ground trembled once, faintly. From the center of the orchard, a single new shoot rose through the burned soil, green and untouched by fire. It swayed in the wind like it was breathing. Polk's radio crackled. Sheriff, we've got movement at the old Corbin house. The greenhouse lights just came on. Polk met Caroline's eyes. She's not finished, is she? Caroline's reply was barely audible. No, she's just beginning again. At dawn, the fire crews reported containment. 40 acres reduced to ash, but 1 tree still stood. The first, the oldest, untouched. Caroline walked toward it alone. The bark was smooth, almost silver now. At its base, half buried in soot, lay Isa's locket. Inside was a photo, not from 1932, but new. Caroline herself, standing among the flames, eyes closed, her stomach turned. The photo was wet, freshly developed. The hum returned, faint, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Caroline raised her recorder one last time. May 22nd, 5:47 a.m. The orchard survived the fire. Isa Corbin may have transcended death through botanical symbiosis. If this continues, the cycle could repeat. I'm heading to the greenhouse. She paused, voice shaking. If I don't make it back, tell them. The orchard remembers. She turned toward the distant hill where the greenhouse glowed faintly through the fog. Her figure disappeared into the light. The last apple fell from the surviving tree and hit the ground without a sound. May 22nd, 7:40 a.m., the Corbin greenhouse. The glass house stood at the top of the hill like an unblinking eye. Sunlight scattered across its cracked panes, and inside, every surface shimmered with condensation. The orchard fire still smoldered below, sending thin fingers of smoke through the morning fog. Caroline stepped inside quietly. The air was hot, damp, a living lung exhaling. Rows of tables sagged under clay pots and decayed journals. On the far side, a single lantern burned, though no one had lit it. At its base sat a reel-to-reel recorder. Its spools turned slowly, the tape humming through itself like a heartbeat. A label on the side read, Integration, Final Entry, June 1933. Caroline swallowed and pressed play. Static. Then Isa Corbin's voice, older, thinner, but calm. They won't understand what I've done, she said softly. Not yet. They call it disappearance. I call it translation. A pause, a faint rustle of leaves. 3 children, bright as summer. They followed the rhythm willingly, laughter at first, then sleep. They weren't taken. They were chosen. Caroline's hands trembled. Chosen for what? She whispered. To preserve the line, to become roots for the next bloom. Flesh carries memory, but it decays. Wood endures. I gave them the orchard so they'd never die. The voice faltered, trembling with something close to regret. I hear them sometimes. They sing through the soil. They remember every hand that ever touched them. When my own body begins to fail, I'll join them. We'll be one body, a family that can't be broken. Static filled the room. The tape sputtered, then resumed. If you're hearing this, the experiment is complete. The orchard has absorbed what was left of me. Burn it if you must. But the truth is simple. Life always finds another route. The reel slowed, clicking to a stop. Caroline stood still, letting the words sink in. Isa had believed she was saving them, not killing them. Her logic was twisted by grief, maybe by madness, but it was also love turned inside out. Caroline switched off the machine and scanned the tables. More tapes, each carefully labeled. Trial 1, Nutrient Exchange. Sap Flow Alignment. Dozens of notes written in Isa's looping hand. She pulled one open, a drawing of an apple core, its seeds replaced by small human hearts. Beneath it, a line in ink. When the hearts root, the mind follows. Caroline exhaled sharply. The entire orchard wasn't an accident. It was deliberate architecture, an organism grown from both botany and guilt. Polk's voice came from behind her. You shouldn't be here alone. Caroline turned. The sheriff stood in the doorway. Soot streaked across her uniform. It's over, Polk said. The fire's out. Whatever's left, we'll catalog and seal. Caroline looked around. Seal it, yes, but don't destroy it. We need to understand it. Polk's brow furrowed. Understand what, exactly? Caroline pointed to the recorder. She wasn't trying to play God. She was trying to outlive guilt. Isa thought she could fix what she broke, that by merging herself and the children into the trees, she was preserving them. It's grief biology, a delusion made flesh. Polk stepped closer, studying the green sheen still clinging to Caroline's gloves. You've been breathing this air too long. Let's finish and get out. Caroline didn't move. There's one more tape. She held up a small reel, unmarked. The metal cool against her skin. She threaded it through the player and pressed play, a man's voice this time. Brittle, formal. June 28th, 1933. Subject IC exhibiting rapid decline. She insists integration was voluntary. Local authorities suspect homicide, remove evidence from site. Program relocated. A door slammed in the background. Another voice entered, softer, female. No more experiments, doctor. She's gone too far. Then Isa again, faint, distant. You can't kill what's already rooted. The tape snapped. Silence filled the greenhouse. Caroline stared at the broken reel, then whispered, It wasn't just her. Someone funded this. Polk's voice was quiet. Whoever did is probably long dead. Then we finish what she couldn't. Polk frowned. What do you mean? Caroline looked through the glass walls toward the orchard below, now smoldering and blackened. We return them. All of them. The children deserve graves, not roots. They began the process that afternoon. Forensic teams combed the ash, collecting fragments, bone, ribbon, bits of porcelain teeth. The air smelled faintly of sap and smoke. Each piece was placed into labeled containers. 43 in total. The orchard's silent census. Caroline worked until dusk. Dirt streaked across her face, hands trembling. She spoke to them as she worked. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know you were trying to be loved. I'll make sure they say your names again. Polk watched her quietly. For the first time since it began, she looked almost at peace. June 1st. Memorial Site. Mill Creek Cemetery. Under a gray sky, 43 markers stood in a gentle curve beneath the ridge. Each stone carried only a first name, carved in simple letters. At the center, a larger stone read, "The Bloom Children, 1932 to 1933. They were planted in silence. They return in memory." Caroline stood among them, recorder in hand. The air was still. No hum, no scent of apples. Polk approached, holding out a folded note. "Came for you this morning. No return address." Caroline unfolded it. A single line written in delicate, spidery script. "You finished the garden." No signature, only a pressed apple blossom inside, brown and dry. She slipped it into her coat pocket and whispered, "Yes, Isa, it's finished." Polk said quietly, "What happens now?" Caroline turned toward the ridge. "We let them rest, and we remember what obsession looks like when it forgets love." The wind rose, carrying the faint scent of blossoms. Just air. Nothing more. Caroline smiled faintly. For the first time in weeks, she believed the silence was real. She turned off the recorder. The red light blinked out. The investigation was over. The orchard was ash. And the dead, finally, were only dead. Afternoon sunlight spilled over the Corbin homestead, warm and golden. Children's laughter rang from the back garden as Isa set the birthday cake on the table. 3 cousins, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Ada June. "Ellis," she smiled, though her hands trembled. "Make a wish," she said. They did, blowing out the candles together. For a heartbeat, all was joy. Then Isa's husband appeared at the door, face pale. "They're asking again about the experiments," he murmured. "You promised it was done." Isa looked at the children, her nephew and nieces, and whispered, "It's never done. They're too fragile for this world. But in the orchard, they'll never wither." Outside, the wind shifted. The apple trees rustled as if answering her. The children giggled, racing toward the orchard with handfuls of cake. Isa followed, humming softly under her breath. The rhyme drifted through the trees, 1 for roots and 1 for bloom, 3 for laughter, 4 for gloom. When the apple hums at night, children fade into the light. The laughter faded, the orchard whispered, and the hills swallowed their names. 80 years later, someone would dig there again and listen.